You when we were together while I was here was I wanted to offer you both a sincere apology. I wrote it, an email to you. I'm sure you didn't get it. You guys didn't overload emails that I sent like 6 years ago. But I didn't. Sorry. What I neglected to include in that apology email that I sent you guys 6 years ago was
regarding all the cell phones over there. Guarding
some realization before. I was working on James was working on the book cover for I actually did send it. I sent the hard version of the book cover and never heard back, but it's okay. I'm not apologizing. Before I even got to that point, with the emails back and forth, I had sent some really nonsensical, sort of really kind of vague emails that were short, like wait on weird stuff. If there's anything else I can do besides donate money, you can probably get I don't want to send my mail, get books that I brought to get to you today. If it's too heavy, I'm happy to ship it partially closed. We might be able to put it in. If you're willing to accept that gift, I would love to I apologize for the 6 or 7 I go cooking my facade and my imagining completely way out there. This is very influenced by those very lucky races. I still think
Often that's the case. Yeah. My dad had a long time I was working I would probably see if you're looking to help you guys.
If you don't need to write it, you can take it wrong.
I need to apologize officially for that. I was in the process.
No, I just got to started. Got some rest and some emotions. Got some rest as well as. Sometimes when it's just one or the other, it's not such a good thing. But the mix is better. But it's gonna look bright. I haven't been aware of that. I have a drain cleaner that you don't need to bother with it. If the drains are not bothering you, just leave it. That's all. Where the I've actually got biodegradable. It works with enzymes. It's biodegradable. It's not a chemical, it's bacteria. That's what it is. I gotta remember exactly where it is. Yeah, it becomes a problem.
Morning. Oh, yeah.
Did less probably.
That's nice. You guys getting adjusted to sleep?
Yes. Yeah. We just have a different really hard to sleep. This is in Canada, we sleep better. But they're both exhausted. So that interrupts. But yeah, we're sleeping.
But you can see the river from the window, so that's right next to
Probably double that. I do 45 to 39.
Do you have time for a question?
Which side? Which side?
You keep giving down.
Okay, so I should
Because mine's different. Printer wise. This is what it's still on my screen. That's my first talk I ever went to. So I took it all green credit. Stuck it here.
How's everyone today? Great. Yeah, there's a few things we would like to do with you today. The first thing I'd like to do, though, is talk to you a little bit about the makeup of the soul, and then refer that to developing certain parts of your soul in terms of how you develop it and how that relates to sin, and also how it relates to your emotions. And then we'll also, today we'll also talk a little about the spirit influences that are upon you as well, because it's good to understand some of those influences in terms of how those influences in particular interact with your sin. So you can see how your sin attracts certain groups of people who are in the spirit world, and what sort of types of things those spirits may do, sometimes malevolently, and sometimes thinking they're doing it in your best interest, but they don't even really know what your best interests are. Just like a person on earth might think they're doing something in your best interests, and they don't really know what your best interests are either. So what we want to do is just talk about those things today. But so what I want to do is start off with the whole discussion, a bit more of a discussion about the soul. Now, some of you will know some of this information, but I just want to make sure that you have a good understanding. I'm going to talk about a heterosexual soul. So the reason why I've drawn them, the two halves separated from each other there, is because for the most part, the majority of you are not aware of who the other half of you actually is, right? And there's lots of things that cause this sort of barrier to occur between the two halves. Firstly, when we incarnate, we're thinking of ourselves as an individual rather than a half of an individual. And that thought generally starts off as a feeling that's coming from both parents that enters you while you're in the womb. And so most people on earth don't have a belief about soulmates themselves, and they don't have a conviction or a knowledge of what that is, in that you're two halves of the same soul. And so what happens is when you incarnate on the earth at the moment, for the majority of times what happens is you're incarnating and you start absorbing the emotional content of the belief systems of your mother and father to a large degree. And if your mother and father have a strong knowledge or knowing about soulmates, which a lot of them claim to have, but they have none whatsoever, what happens is whatever their belief systems are emotionally, you start to absorb as your own. So by the time you're born, most people, and you know when you're born there's very little intellectual awareness, is there? But there's some emotional awareness by the time you're born. You're quite sensitive just before you're born, while you're in the womb, you're quite sensitive to feelings coming at you from your parents, and particularly feelings associated and with love, but you're not aware that they are loving. There's sort of an instinctual measurement, if you like, of a loving feeling, in a similar way that an animal would have an instinctual feeling of a loving feeling from humans. And because the development of the soul is only just beginning, and the development of the mind is only just beginning as well, the baby, the child who's just born, doesn't have really any way of determining, aside from these instinctual responses to the feelings they're getting from their environment. And so what happens is, by this stage, the child starts developing, and as it develops during childhood, it gets to the stage where it starts seeing that mum and dad are together, and so there's a lot of, and this is for the most part, obviously we know some of you didn't have a mum or didn't have a dad with you when you were a child, but for the most part, we start seeing, there's couples, and these couples have had children, and you start making certain intellectual assessments of that. But more importantly, you start also feeling the feelings that are going on between your mother and your father, and also between other couples. And you start feeling those kind of feelings. But unfortunately, all of those feelings on earth pretty much are based on addiction. And so you start measuring your view of romantic love as a measurement of the addictions that are getting met. And you see them getting met in couples around you. And at this stage, you still don't have any real intellectual idea that this is what is going on. But it's in a very emotional process. You're emotionally aware that when there's something wrong between a couple, you know there is. Like when there's something wrong between particularly your mum and dad, you know there is. But you don't really know maybe what it is, and you don't really understand why there is. And also, because of your own lack of sexual development, You don't really know how the sexual side of the soul is working with each other or not working, or all those kind of things. But there is a feeling-based assessment, if you like, that's occurring in the soul. But all the way through this, because we're learning that everything that happens between romantic partnerships is functionally based on addiction, there is a growing divide between the two halves of the soul. It's like barriers that are getting put up between the two halves of the soul from feeling each other. Does that make sense to you? Good. And the barrier increases and increases to the point where, from a functional perspective, in terms of an emotional perspective, by the time a person's a teenager, frequently they're not aware at all that there's another half, but they have an addiction for there to be another half. Does that make sense? And so they're not actually aware emotionally who the other half is, but they do have an addiction through puberty. Puberty encourages you partnering up, and because of the sexual feelings that start developing. And because of that, the sexual feelings are now mixed with all the addictions that you've learned from your family of origin generally, and also what you've chosen up until that time yourself. And as a result of that, there is often a very large divide in terms of emotional divide between the two halves of the soul. From God's perspective, however, those two halves are still joined. But the barriers between the two halves are increased depending on the amount of addiction and sin and the amount of untruth that exists within the two halves of the soul. Now, unfortunately, nobody teaches you any of these things all the way through your childhood and all the way through your learning experience. You go to school, and what do they teach you? They don't teach you about love, and they don't teach you about soulmates, and they don't teach you about all the things that are actually very important to your happiness. What they do is they teach you how to function in the very mind-based world in which we currently live. And so then you learn to get a job, and you learn maths, and you learn science, which are all good things to learn. I'm not saying they're not, because there are certain parts of your own soul that certain things you learn are going to resonate with because of your personality and nature, and it's very good for you to learn a large variety of things when you're a child, because then you can start feeling what you resonate with. But unfortunately, a lot of the things we also resonate with are based on the addictions we've already formed. So in this regard, we don't really come to know ourselves very well. Now, of course, in amongst all this, there are bodies attached to these halves, aren't there? So you've got the male body. It has two bodies, the spirit body and the physical body, attached through the silver cord, so the physical body to the spirit body. And then there is actually an energy cord that connects the spirit body to the soul, but spirits can't see it, so they haven't really labelled it. When you're in the soul, let's call it, shall we, the golden cord. Like silver, gold, let's call it that. On the female side, obviously, there's the two female bodies as well. And in the bodies, the spirit body, physical body, and in the bodies, there is the mind of the spirit body. And the mind of the spirit body is where people start doing most of their thinking. So your brain, your physical brain, doesn't actually do your thinking. It's the spirit body's brain that does all the thinking. And your brain is designed to funnel these spirit body thoughts into your mind so that you can become consciously aware of them, and then can use the physical body to express the thoughts of your mind. Right? So the mind is actually sitting in the spirit body, and that's why when you pass, your mind and all of its memories and everything don't disappear, because if they were in your brain and not in your spirit body mind, they would all actually disappear, wouldn't they? Yeah. If when you died, your physical body would die, and therefore all of your mind would die. And if that was your mind where you stored all your memories and everything, that place where you had all your memories and stored them, and also made decisions and so forth, if that was the place that died, then as a spirit you wouldn't make any decisions and you wouldn't know who you were. And so it's quite obvious that the memories are actually stored in your soul, but they are the mind is used as the funnel into your soul to process a lot of things, and also to drive the body. So the physical body has all these physiological functionings, and we won't get too complicated into them, but they include your, all of the hormonal systems and the, endocrine systems and all of the circulation systems and nervous systems and all these other systems that are in the body. And basically the brain of the physical body has been designed to control all of those things, but the way it controls it is by the mind and the spirit body having some level of control. And then the other parts of the control are all instinctual. So in other words, your spirit body mind doesn't have to say breathe now, and then a few seconds later breathe again. It doesn't have to do that, because as a part of the automatic functioning of the brain, it's controlling, your physical body and its symptoms and how it works and so forth. And a lot of those functionings are, you'd call them instinctual in basis. They're based on instinct. And this leaves your mind, your thinking part of your mind, free to do a lot of other things that if it had to manage all of the physical body's functions, it's pretty complicated, your physical body. In fact, the physical body is the most complicated physical thing in the universe. Right? It's the pinnacle of God's creation in the physical. And the spirit body is the pinnacle of God's creation in the spiritual universe. And the soul, of course, is the pinnacle of God's creation. Right? In whatever universe. So your physical body's brain is very complex, and as most of you would be aware, we use a very small portion of it, where most of it is quite dormant, and the reason why it is because sin has taken hold of us so much that those parts of our mind don't need to function anymore, because we're basically just functioning on emotional demand based upon our sin. And of course that has a degradation effect on our body systems and causes all sorts of problems, right the way through to genetic problems if it's severe enough. But here we go, we've got this sort of system, and I don't want to go too much into the complexities of the system, but to show you a few things of where things happen. So a lot of the thoughts you have are happening here rather than here. They're happening in your spirit body's mind rather than in your soul. Now, that's because on earth we've been taught to become mind dominant. And in fact, the whole developmental phase of you entering the seventh sphere and then entering the eighth, during that period in the seventh sphere, you learn how to get rid of your mind dominance. You learn that your mind is not actually your soul's mind. Your soul's mind, the soul itself has senses, and it has emotions, and a combination, so the sensory apparatus of your soul feeds and is controlled by automatic functions as well, but primarily by the emotions of the soul. And the emotions of the soul is the brain of the soul. Right? So the brain of the spirit body, you could call that your mind, is not the same as the brain of your soul, which is actually the emotions that you have. Now I'm simplifying it quite a lot, because you can imagine the soul is the most complicated thing in the universe, so we need to bear that in mind, but I'm trying to simplify it for you to understand that if you want to develop the brain of your soul, you are going to have to become more sensitive to your emotions. Right? Because that's the brain of the soul. And every time that you focus your intent on developing your mind, right, or focus your intent on making decisions in your mind, you are avoiding the development of your soul. That make sense? Right? So everything gets down to how the sensory apparatus is basically gathering information from the universe around you. So in your physical form, when somebody touches you, the sensory apparatus of your physical body feels that touch as impressions. There's a nervous system that controls all of that, and that's passed straight to the brain. But it's now also, depending on the type of touch, and all of the information about the type of touch and all the information associated with the emotions of how you're being touched coming from the other person, because there's a lot of information there. All of that information is getting passed through the silver cord to the brain of the spirit body, and then through the golden cord to the brain of the soul, to the emotions stored in the soul, the memories stored in the soul. And so you could say, couldn't you then, that even just touching somebody just softly has a certain type of response, but touch them hard, like where there's a purposeful cause of pain in that body, then obviously the intent is also measured as to whether somebody wanted to do that to you or not, or it was just an accident, right? And all of these things get passed through that brain and into the soul. And if you do not feel those emotions completely, they get stored in the soul and blocked. They get blocked by the intent to not feel them. So the soul's brain also includes intention, and it controls, your intention controls a lot of your responses in your soul. So if you look at intention, which is also basically, again, a feeling or an emotion, and you look at all the other things we're talking about, like faith, love, truth, they all end up being emotions existing in the soul. Right? Now, as to what kind of experience you have, depends upon what kind of emotions are associated with those particular things. So if you've been ridiculed when somebody told you truth in the past, then you will associate internally in the brain of the soul, you'll associate hearing truth with being ridiculed. You will associate it with a negative experience. And if you haven't released that negative experience, every time somebody shares some truth with you, you'll presume that they were trying to put you down. Every single time. Right? And that is not controlled by your brain of your spirit body. You can try to control it, but you won't be able to, because the brain of the soul is more powerful than the brain of the spirit body, and it will continually feed this information to the brain of the spirit body. And so the brain of the spirit body will go, oh, another person telling me truth? I'm sick of this, they're putting me down all the time. That you'll automatically have that thought arise in your spirit body because of the association that's going on emotionally inside the brain of your soul. Follow? So everything that happens to you gets stored eventually in your soul as memories. But these memories are not just pictures of what happened. They include pictures of what happened. In fact, they include the sensory apparatus of everything that happened. So they include the picture, they include the smell, they include the taste, they include the hearing, what you heard, they include the touch, they include also the emotions coming at you from the other people, how attacking or loving those particular emotions were. All of that experience is getting funneled from your physical body and through the sensory apparatus of the soul, which are beyond your physical body's ability to understand. And in fact, the sensory apparatus of the soul are beyond your spirit body's ability to understand. Like, you will never understand them with your spirit body's mind, ever, because they're beyond it. They have much higher capacity. They are impossible for a spirit body mind to grasp. And this is why, even if you reach the sixth sphere of the spirit world, you will never, ever, ever understand your soul. You'll live and use your soul, and you'll be very, sort of seamless in the way you do that, just like how you live on earth is pretty seamless, right? You go and do things and you say things and you hear things and you respond to things and it all feels pretty seamless. But the problem is that you will never understand with that mind how the soul actually works. To understand how the soul works, you've got to live in your soul. And you've actually got to receive love from God enough to understand how it works. Without God's love, you cannot understand how your soul actually works, ever. You can guess, you can postulate, you can reason, you can try to work it out, but you never will know. The only way you will know is by receiving God's love and eventually becoming at one with God. And through the process of receiving more and more love, the soul's capacity to understand even itself grows. Right? To the point where you know what's going on in your own soul and in the soul of others. But if you don't receive God's love and you just grow to the sixth sphere, which is the perfect natural man, in other words, you get rid of all of your sin regarding other people, how you treat other people, you get to the stage where you've gotten rid of all of that sin and you're now the perfect natural woman or man, you will never know how your soul's really working at that point. And you never can know. Because you need to understand how God's love works to know a lot of the mechanisms that exist in the soul and also, therefore, the effects the soul has on your spirit body and your physical body. Make sense so far? Okay. So, from that, we can see that the brain of the soul is this sensory apparatus passing into and storing events as memories, which include the senses, includes what you saw, what you heard, what you smelt, what you tasted, all these things. But it also includes all the emotions that came with all that. In fact, the emotions have a far greater effect on all of those experiences, right, than the actual sight or the hearing or the scent have. So you end up in this state in the soul where you've got all this emotion. Now, bearing in mind what I said about how we've grown, you can see a lot of that emotion is based upon sin or error. Things out of harmony with love, missing the mark of love. So we've made a lot of associations, emotional associations. So we've got to come to learn to get out of our mind and to start making emotional connections with what's going on and why we feel the way we feel and why we think the way we think. And if we don't do that, then we'll never understand what is motivating us to do whatever we do. And we'll never be able to change it even, really. Right? You can use your mind to govern your actions, but the problem is if the soul has stored emotions governing your actions, at some point your soul is always going to override your mind. Right? And this is why a lot of the religious teachings of earth end up not being effective. So even though many religions in history have taught that you should have some level of moral, some level of morality as God defines it, and you're taught, by religions, sometimes falsely, sometimes truthfully, what is moral and what isn't, even though you might be brought up in that sort of organisational structure, your soul's emotional state, where it has made associations between your emotions, your senses and your beliefs, are going to dominate what you finish up doing. So this is why, many Christians are taught, it's wrong to commit adultery, for example. But a lot of them do it. Many Christians are taught it's wrong to lie, but a lot of them do it, sometimes every day. They've got to try hard not to do it. Because the actual soul has stored beliefs, sensory memories and emotional memories and beliefs that say, in this situation you've got to lie. In this situation you've got to withhold the truth. In this situation it's dangerous if you don't. Dangerous to the physical body if you don't. So the soul will dominate even when you've been educated in your mind to do something completely different. Make sense? So, if you add your beliefs, which are some of the most powerful things that exist in your soul actually, and particularly your beliefs about what is spiritual and what is emotional, they have some of the most powerful effects of what you're going to do in your future. You add those with your senses, what you've stored sensorily, what you remember through your what you saw, what you heard, what you felt, what you tasted, what you smelt, right? And you add all that together, and you add also the emotional barrage frequently that's coming from all sorts of people all around you, as well as your own emotional responses to what's going on around you. These things are now stored in your soul. They're not in your mind. Right? Your mind is going to be almost like a passive agreeer with whatever that soul system is saying to it. So if the soul system's saying love is sacrifice, which is actually a spiritual belief that could be stored in the soul, which is stored in the soul over hundreds of events in your childhood that have taught you that love is sacrifice. And your soul has that belief, love is sacrifice, and emotionally you feel, I need to sacrifice to show somebody that I love them, and also somebody needs to sacrifice to me in order to show that they love me. And if those feelings are there, in your mind, when anybody does not sacrifice for you, you'll think, they don't love me. And when other people want you to sacrifice for them, you'll feel like, well, if I love them, I would. Even though love is sacrifice is a completely false concept from God's perspective. Even though it is completely in error, you will feel with your entire feeling structure, your entire belief structure, you're going to feel that it's true. And you're going to act upon that. If you want to love people, you will act upon that belief every day, sacrificing for people. Right?
Oh, it doesn't matter, does it, if our intellect thinks, oh, I've learned now love isn't sacrifice.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Yeah. Because your intellect is just going to follow along with what you believe in your soul. Now, one of the hardest things to do is to have an intellect in disagreement with the soul. Because the intellect's always going to lose at some point. Right? So you can tell yourself certain things are true. You can tell yourself certain things will work out. You can tell yourself certain things are real in your mind. You can tell yourself that love isn't sacrifice, for example. But while you feel it in your soul, it's going to have no effect on your behaviour. Right? And if you try to use your mind to change the whole love is sacrifice to whole love isn't sacrifice, right? While your soul still has the memories and the beliefs and the senses and the emotions that say completely the opposite thing to you, you're going to end up in really, really difficult emotional state internally where you're constantly fighting your emotions. It's actually bad for you to do that. You'll end up with certain body systems starting to fail as a result of it. When I say body systems, spirit body systems start failing because the energy in certain parts of your spirit body is blocked, because the soul-based energy that controls certain parts of your spirit body is blocked. And as a result, the physical body's energy systems will be blocked, and your physical body will start developing injuries, which on earth you call diseases or sicknesses or illnesses, but they are actually injuries that are due to the blockages that are occurring in the soul. Yeah? And the more you live in your mind, and the more you avoid your emotions, the more prone you become to those injuries. The more prone you become to the diseases, the infirmities and so forth. Right? Now usually, for the average person on earth, by the time they're now 20, they've already got a lot of these and already affecting their body. And anybody who's in the medical profession knows that nowadays, in particular, more and more children with quite severe physical problems are presenting themselves, right? And this is because of the increasing disconnect between the soul and the mind or the spirit body, and then the effect that that is having. Make sense? Okay.
Are these what's the cause of all the autoimmune diseases?
Not just all the autoimmune diseases, things like cancer as well, things like all the autoimmune, sometimes the brain-based ALS, those kind of diseases, any self-attacking disease where the body is decaying by itself, these are all the cause. Unfortunately, this also attracts groups of spirits to your spirit physical body, and they themselves have their own blockages with their own energy systems. And so now the addiction you have might be one thing, but then the injury they have might cause a blockage in a different part of your body because of them. And so now you're also prone to referred injuries that are coming to your physical body from spirits trying to control your body. And it becomes very, very complicated, very, very quickly. And if you're not sensitive emotionally, it's very hard to work out what's actually going on, right? And this is why, for the most part, most of the medical profession is finding all of these things very difficult to resolve. Yep. And you can understand why. It's a very complicated system, but it's based on some fundamental... the medical profession is based on some fundamental flaws in the system, and that is, once you deny there's a soul and deny there's a spirit body, now you're just trying to work with the effects on the physical. Right? And when you're working with the effects on the physical, you're going to start thinking the effects are the causes, and when they're just the effects. And when you start doing that, you start throwing things at the effects, trying to fix the effects, but the cause is still behind the effects and they're still going on. And so you end up with this very complicated problem. And then you add spirit healing to the equation. You end up with even bigger issues, because now the spirits are trying to heal your spirit body and heal directly your physical body. But in doing so, they're trying to provide energy, and they're trying to provide a source of calming down the physical body, not understanding, the majority of these spirits do not understand at all that your soul is causing these problems. The sin that's in the soul is causing these problems. And so most of the spirits, even right up to the 5th or 6th sphere, and even in the 6th sphere, if they come to actually try to heal your body to help you out, and some do, and they don't understand why, no matter how much energy they pump into you, they can't really fix provide the problem or fix the problem permanently. They've got to keep providing energy, keep providing energy, keep providing energy until you die. Right? And then they still don't understand, even with all of that, because they don't understand how the soul works. They don't understand that actually, no, the sin that exists in the soul is providing these is where the source of all these discrepancies are occurring. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the sin in the soul is driving the physical injuries. But did you say, or did I mishear, that it's actually worse to have this intellectual disconnect?
Yes.
So that
it's
makes
worse.
the physical effect worse. To be
That's
aware that the sin is there, but not to be
correct.
Emotionally working.
It makes it more difficult.
That
Yeah. So awareness is going to improve something if you know what it really is in your soul. But of course, unless the blockage is removed, it will continue to cause the problem. So the blockage has to get removed from the soul. And any sin, any addiction that you have, any sin that you have, causes a blockage in the soul. Right? God designed it to cause a blockage in the soul so that you knew you were sinning. There's actually mathematical formulas that govern how, when you sin, how the blockage occurs in your soul. Yeah?
I was thinking about this morning, and I think hopefully applies. Yesterday you said, make sure you get to the cause,
Yeah.
which is what we're talking about now.
That's right.
Yeah. So my question is, I've always, and I think I'm mistaken here, probably, I've always had this idea that when I'm going to get to my causal emotions, my soul-based sin,
Yeah.
as you're now describing,
Yeah.
is going to start from childhood. Is that incorrect?
It is incorrect, yes,
Yep.
because
Yep.
it could come from any source in your entire life,
Okay.
not just in your childhood. And in fact, the majority of the sin that causes blockages in you
Yep.
is not caused by anyone other than you. So if we look at example of childhood, and let's say every time as a child, every time you cried, you were smacked. So you had a physical, violent response to your tears every time you cried. Right? And that's happened to some people, where almost every time they cried, they've been smacked. Now, the person who did that is obviously wrong. They're obviously not loving their child, right? So there is a withdrawal of love occurring in the moment that the child is being smacked. Obviously, a violent act is a withdrawal of love, right? So there's a withdrawal of love occurring, the child is being smacked. The child is feeling the withdrawal of love and connecting it to them crying. So what do they do with that information? So the child will, so independent of the parents now, the child will have joined the belief that tears or sadness is always going to result in violence. So inside of their soul, there'll be a connection between violence and sadness. So they've got to they'll have a fear that says, I've got to stay away from sadness, because if I get into sadness, there will be a violent response from my surroundings, which hurts me sensorially. And it also hurts me emotionally. You follow? So there's this joining that's happening inside of their soul between those two things. The child is now doing that to themselves.
Not crying. Choosing not to cry, you mean? No?
Choosing to not cry. And also the belief exists inside the child now. You understand?
Yes.
So the parent's action is one thing.
Yeah.
Then there's the child's response to the parent's action, which is a free will thing, right? Now, some children, instead of reacting and saying, I've got to shut down my sadness, they react the opposite, some children. Some children say, I'm going to cry more. So whenever there's violence, I will cry, but I won't actually deal with anything.
So it's almost like the action could vary.
That's correct.
The action could vary.
Based
It's
upon-
all based upon that filter or that.
Not just that, it's based also upon the personality or the nature of the child as well. The action could vary. And as you know, each person has a completely different personality and nature. And so while the action, the causal action, the parent's behaviour, is the cause of the child making associations, the associations that develop are completely independent of the parent.
Initial.
They're also, there's an additional thing of the nature and the personality of the child and its own understanding and its own fears that are already established will determine how the child now responds. And one child may respond angrily and the other one might respond with silence in the same situation.
But is the causal emotion that original smack or not?
Well, no, that's the
No.
sensory experience that occurred, which was out of harmony with love,
Right.
and the withdrawal of love that occurred that the child became responsive to. Now, the problem with it happening to a child, there's an additional problem, and that is the child doesn't know how to prevent it. Right? So the child is dependent upon, for survival, dependent upon its parents. So it doesn't know, and it doesn't have the intellectual development to prevent these things from going on, or to prevent the associations that are going on inside of itself. It only has that capacity when it becomes an adult and it's left home and it's gotten out of the environment that has been abusive. Then it's only then got the capacity really to sort through what actually happened and its own responses to what happened. However, by this stage, the majority of the beliefs have already been firmly established in the soul. And so its desire to re-look at the situation will be quite, particularly if it's living in its mind, its desire will be non-existent to deal with what happened in its childhood. So it is necessary to look at what happened in your childhood, but everything that happened, you might have the same thing happen to, say, Paddy, have happened. Both of you might have exactly the same thing happen, but you've got a different personality to Paddy. You've got a different nature to Paddy. You've got you had a different. You might be the third child and she might be the first child. There's different things going on in the family as to what's happening as well, and those different things will determine to a large degree what beliefs you created, which now exist inside of you.
And the sin then becomes how, so that those beliefs then now start to dictate how you use your will.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about sin, it's not just going back to that smack when you're a child, because you and Paddy have both made decisions based on those beliefs for, how old are you now? For many years.
Pretty old.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to dealing with your sin, there's a lot of free will choices you have made.
To avoid these memories of these experiences in your childhood, you made a lot of decisions.
Yes.
And those decisions caused you to harm others.
Oh, yeah.
And in the harming of others, you created your own effects of sin, the cause of which was your inability or lack of desire to connect to how you were harmed, and your lack of desire to feel about it, right? So this is why for many people they sort of, they start going, oh, all I need to do with the trauma of my childhood.
Right.
No, you're going to need to do with all of the beliefs and all of the emotions that came about from the trauma of your childhood. The trauma of your childhood was the trigger, but then the creation of all the emotions and all the belief systems and all the sensory things that happened and all the things you decided to shut down, block out, get away from, run away from, prevent, be afraid of, and everything inside of you. That's, you could say, all of those things are now causing your sin, right? And your inability to deal with all of those things are going to be a problem. Yeah?
So from the gaining of information from the smack to the emotions and with withdrawal of love, you're saying people interpret that and react and behave differently in the future.
Yeah.
What determines that now, I'm wondering? Is that coming from parents? Or
Well, there's a lot of things that determine. Firstly, the personality of the child. So your child might have the child
comes from
may.
parents?
Sorry.
Which comes from parents?
No, it doesn't. No, the personality of the child comes from God.
God.
Yeah. So there's nothing in error about your personality or nature. It's all perfect, comes from God. And the personality or nature of the child, which God designed the child to have. So some children might have like a love of truth, and some other children might have more of a love of faith, and some other children might have a stronger desire to connect with the universe around them than others, and so forth. And some might have a strong desire to understand themselves, and these natural inclinations, which are a part of your personality and nature, you discover over time. But the personality and nature does determine how you respond to certain sensory and emotional inputs.
Okay, so it's
From your
really
environment.
from God.
Yeah, so the personality and nature is from God. Obviously, the bad behaviour came from your parents.
Sure.
And the net effect of the bad behaviour, including the emotions, because the emotions of your parents are a large part of the bad behaviour, they have also entered you. So now you've got your personality interacting with the bad behaviour of others and the sensory feelings you had as a result, including the senses, taste, touch, smell and images and so forth, as well as all the emotions coming at you. And you've joined all these things together and you said, wow, that hurt. That experience hurt. And your personality and nature will determine how you respond to that to a large degree.
Okay.
You follow? And so some people, the child might go into like a rage. And then because the child might have certain feelings inside of itself about this was wrong, but in the way it's responding, at this stage the child, remember, hasn't learnt about love yet. So it's being taught through the experience what love is, and unfortunately the teachings are all in error, because they're being taught that, you know, when you love somebody, sometimes you smack them. You know, I can remember saying to my own sons, I was a part of a religious faith who believed in corporate punishment of children, and I remember saying to my own sons at different times, you know, I hate doing this, but I got to do it. Right? So, you know, the children learn violence associated with love, right? Not good, not a good association. And this is why many of us are tolerant of bad behaviour of others as adults. Because we do associate to a degree. We often say things like, oh, you know, I can see this person treating this other person badly, he must like her a lot. You know, even things like that we say, not understanding what's really going on. It's a shutdown of emotions that causes a lot of these things. Yeah. So there's a lot of associations going on. So I don't want to delve too deeply into it. I'm just trying to explain that as a background. Yeah. But I'm happy to answer some questions.
I think this gets back to, it seems relevant to the general question of sin, because I can feel the sin fighting for itself right now.
Yeah.
Which is like, well, what was I supposed to do? What was
Correct.
the child supposed to do?
That is one feeling you're going to have, and that's one feeling the sin has.
I was trapped, and I can see how I retreated and my brother got aggressive.
Correct.
But it's, if my personality came from God, what choice did I have? That was my personality retreated because that's who I am.
Well, there's a
So I'm
difference
cornered
between
all the
what
way.
choice you had and what choice you now have.
Right.
So don't get caught up in, like, it's very true that back then, what choice did you have?
So there's grief
Like
to be done.
if you tried withdrawal, that seemed to calm your parents down.
Yeah.
Right? Your brother tried anger. What did that do?
Well, it took the heat off of me.
Yeah, but what did it do for him?
For him, I don't know what it did for him.
It made him feel strong or powerful over them.
Yeah.
But in the end, it actually encouraged more anger from his parents.
Yeah, he seemed to always be in trouble and always.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So he chose one path because of different parts of his nature. You chose another. Both things you could say were almost inevitable at that point. Right. Given your personality versus his personality and so forth. Right. So yes, you're right in saying, well, what choice did I have then? Well, I agree. What choice did you have then?
Yeah.
But you have one now.
Yeah. And the problem is we keep justifying actions now based on that.
And so does the
early
therapeutical industrial complex.
Correct. So now we're going, I want an easy fix to that old problem, and then my body will start exhibiting other problems, and I'll say, I want some therapy, drugs usually, fixes to those problems, so because I don't want to have to go through the honesty, the truthful process of coming to terms with what actually happened. I don't want to emotionally, as an adult, come to terms with what went on. That makes sense?
Yeah.
And that's driven by an emotion coming from a belief inside of you, which basically is saying, somebody else did it to me, so they should have to fix it.
Or I shouldn't have to.
I shouldn't have to. God should, or they should. If God should have designed a better system, not given them free will, in other words, right? Or they should fix it, but I shouldn't have to. I'm the innocent victim, right? Now, while that is true that you were the innocent victim as a child, you can choose to no longer allow these beliefs and emotions to affect the rest of your life by changing them. But to change them, you're going to have to be very honest about them. Much more honest than the majority of people on earth are prepared to be. Right? And so what we end up doing is we say, well, I don't want to fix them. God obviously isn't. I'm developing now these physical ailments and all these other things are happening to me. So God's not fixing it. So for God, not interested in a relationship with God if that's how he's going to treat me. And then you get down to the track, well, the medical profession at least started trying to help my physical body, so I'm going to go to them, the drug industry, the medical profession, and help me continue to avoid what happened to me, what happened in my early developmental part of my life, right? And then we're also, because of this developing rage that has occurred inside of us, of feeling that it's all unfair and unjust, we now are prepared to visit our own injuries on others, which becomes our sin.
Yes.
Right? What we're basically saying is, it happened to me, so that gives me the right to do it to somebody else. That's really fundamentally what we're saying to ourselves. Now, from God's perspective, that is a complete untruth. Just because something happened to you, it doesn't give you the automatic right to do it to somebody else. In fact, if you loved them, you would choose not to do it. If you fully understood the harm to yourself, why would you visit a similar type of harm on somebody else? Right? If you had felt the harm done to yourself properly, can you see you'd be so sensitive to doing it to somebody else? You'd be going, I don't want to do what was done to me. It was being hard enough for me to fix that. Why would I want to visit a similar problem on somebody else?
And I can't even begin to see how I would visit that same sin on someone else. I can see how it exists.
Well, you might not visit the same sin on someone else.
Yeah.
You will visit the sin based upon what are now your beliefs.
The fundamental.
What are your senses? What your emotions are telling you that are stored inside of you? That's what you will visit on somebody else.
So
Can I give you an example? Your parents used corporal punishment, you withdrew, shut down. When you have a child, your idea of bringing up a child is no restriction at all. Now, you know what that does to your child? It absolutely destroys them. Right? It's actually worse because they feel there's no law now. So it's actually worse than what your own parents did to you. You follow me?
Yeah.
From God's perspective. So in the belief systems and the senses and emotions you haven't dealt with, the actions you now take are not considering what love would do, what God's love would do. You're just considering, I don't want to do what was done to me, so I'm going to do probably the opposite, if I can. And the opposite being, in this case, no restriction upon my children at all. And what's going to happen by the time your child's 3 years or 4 years old, they're going to be overcloaked, spirit influenced, they'll be diagnosed with ADHD or some other similar type of illness. By the time they're 7 or 8 or 9 years of age, they'll be diagnosed with some kind of mental disability or mental illness. And by the time they're 15 or 16, they're probably going to be a criminal. Right? And all because I chose a knee-jerk reaction to the damage that was done to me. You follow? So.
And I mean, that's in your relationships. You're going, anytime there's conflict, you're going to want to withdraw rather than resolve. You will perceive attack when there's none, and you'll always be retreating. So that is also a sin. That is a sin of not loving your partner or whoever, your friend.
So you're not sinning the same way as your mum and dad, but you're still sinning in a different way. Your sins are now different.
So can you see when we talk about sin, everyone wants to go back to mum smacked me when I cried, but actually we've made so many decisions now as adults in avoidance when we had the choice, deal with that thing. We chose not to, and we've made many, many myriad decisions. That is the sin that weighs the most heavily on us, because that is our free will.
We chose that.
Yeah.
We chose that to avoid our own pain, which was a selfish decision. Because it was fundamentally driven by our own selfish need to avoid our own pain. Yeah. So it's a very selfish decision, and we're willing in that place to visit our selfish decision upon others. And we have a full level of the sin itself is saying, you're justified doing this. This is a good thing you're doing. So for many parents now, the sin is saying, you're justified not smacking your child or not controlling your child's behaviour in any way. You're justified just letting them roam free, as they say. They'll develop over time. You're justified not sending them to school. You hated school, so now you're not sending them to school. You're justified doing that. There's all these things that you feel you're justified doing, and all of them will be based upon the fact that the sin inside of you is dictating every single decision, and your mind is just following along with the decision that the sin has made, and trying to bring everything externally into an alignment with the sin that exists inside. So inside of me, I might feel like I went to school, it was terrible, I don't want to visit that on my child. So there's my error that I'm not releasing, because education is actually a good thing. And also having children interact with other children is a good thing. They can learn how to love. But I'm saying, no, it's all too traumatic for me. So I'm not going to visit that upon my child. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my child out of school. I'm going to homeschool my child and all this kind of stuff. And in the process of doing that, I am actually visiting a whole heap of belief systems upon my child that is actually damaging for the child's future development. And therefore I'm sinning, I'm damaging my child's future. But my mind is saying, I'm a great mother, I'm doing the right thing for my child. So even though there's a whole heap of negative consequences, inside of me I'm saying, I'm a good person doing this. I'm justified doing this. You see, the mind is saying it's loving for me to do this, even though it's the sin, the unloving sin that exists in your soul driving the action. Yeah. You follow? Yeah.
So are you saying that sin is strictly our beliefs, or is sin something?
Well, remember we said that the brain of the soul is emotional. So all of the beliefs you have are stored as emotions inside of you. So yes, the sin is all these false beliefs, because anything that's false, remember the definition of sin is anything out of harmony with love that misses the mark of perfect love, that's sin. So any emotion that exists inside of you that is out of harmony with the perfect mark of love, which is the sin, is formulated inside of you as belief systems and feelings that support those belief systems that you're going to make choices and decisions about.
So the emotions are always linked to a belief.
Well,
is that true or no?
They wouldn't exist. See, emotions that are allowed to pass through you, not stored.
Right, negative emotions.
Any emotion
Okay.
that's passed through you, once you've passed through you, it's finished. There's no attached belief with it. Okay. But when you hold on to the emotion, you will attach beliefs to it. And those beliefs are also stored in your soul. The emotion, God designed the soul where the emotions pass through you. You have an experience, and the experience moves on to the next experience and the next experience. God designed you that, tonight you're looking at the lovely sunset and feeling peaceful. Then you go inside and you look at your hot wife and you go, I'd like to have sex with her. There's another feeling, and you do that, let's say. And then it comes over you, I need to sleep. And every one of those things is not being stored, it's just being had as an experience, right?
And not linked to any belief.
And not necessarily at this stage linked to any belief if we allow it to pass through completely. But when we store it, and particularly store stuff from our history, we then start developing beliefs upon that. Like, let's say tonight, Mary had sex with me, and so tomorrow night when I'm sitting down looking at the lovely sunset again, and I look at my hot wife, and I think I'd like to have sex with her, and then she doesn't want to, I'm going, but why? Like, the whole experience was the same as last night. We should do the whole thing again. You follow me? And this is where beliefs start to get encouraged. We start encouraging beliefs which then drive unloving behaviour. Right? So God's intention was you'd have the experience and the experience would pass through you, not be stored. You'd have a memory of it. but the memory would not be emotional because the emotional signature is gone. But when I store the emotional signature of the memory, now I'm going to attach beliefs to it, and those beliefs are going to dictate my next course of action.
So in the case of the child getting smacked,
Yep.
the sin is the smacking, and the sin.
Well, the
also
effect
the
of the parent sin is the smacking. It's the effect
of the parents.
of the parent sin.
Belief.
The parent sin. The
That's
parents
good.
obviously have a feeling that they're allowed to smack God's child.
Yep.
They're allowed to be violent to God's child, and whatever reason they have for that, like I own the child, which is another error. They might have, in fact, 50 emotions associated with their ability to smack their child. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Some of them religious, some of them emotional, some of them about power.
I got hit when I was little, so I can.
Yeah,
hit
justification of your own history. All sorts of reasons why you might have stored the idea and developed a whole set of beliefs that are okay with you now smacking your own children, right?
But on the child's side,
Yep.
the sin is the reaction, right?
Well, in the
Or the totality of
environment,
the memory.
in the environment, and God knows this, that in the environment the child has little choice in that moment,
Yeah. Right.
which we admitted, didn't we? The child has little choice. It either withdraws or it fights or does something. You know, it's going
Does
to
make that choice.
It's going to make a choice, but the child doesn't really know its choice that it's making because it's undeveloped. Its mind is undeveloped. Its emotional condition is undeveloped. It doesn't really know much about love at this point. And God makes a whole series of allowances for that. So God does not punish the child for the child's response. But inside the child there is a developing belief that now must be addressed.
Attached to the emotion.
Attached to the emotions
Yeah.
and attached to the experience. And if that child, as it grows up and gets older and gets out of the home, decides to not deal with that, now the child is committing its own sin. You follow?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Now, he's now an adult making a choice to deny truth and deny an experience and deny how he felt about that experience. He's making the decision to do that.
So it's not a sin until then.
No, well, you could say that it is a sin, but it's graduation in terms of its... he's sinning against the soul the moment he makes the decision as a child, but he doesn't know that. It's not a purposeful decision on his part at this point. So, but as time goes on and as he develops, it becomes a purposeful decision.
Is the issue that he was never allowed to let it pass through him too, right?
Correct? Correct.
Otherwise, it might have not.
Oh, that's right. If he was allowed to have it pass through him as a child, he would never have the problem as an adult.
Yeah.
Right? So there's the additional problems of the parents not only committing violence towards their children, but not allowing their children to have a response to that violence.
Yeah.
Right? So there's that as well. But yes, you're right. If it had passed through him completely at the time. So let's just rewind a little and go back. Let's say the child has hurt himself. So the parent hasn't hurt him, the child's hurt himself. So he's 2 years old, or 1.5 or 1, and he's just learning how to walk, right? And he stands up and he's wobbly, he takes a step or two and bang. Now, if he's allowed to cry completely, he will have no hesitation getting up and trying to walk again. He sees around him that everybody else is walking. He thinks that's pretty good because it's a lot easier than walking. It looks a lot easier than crawling, right? And he already is assessing all of this as I would like to do that. And so he's already got the desire. His desire, he has faith that it's real. He has faith that it's going to happen. He has faith that if he learns it, he's going to get good at it, just like Mummy and Daddy seem to be good at it. So he's already developed all this faith through experience and through what's shown to him. So he tries it. Once his muscles are developed enough and strong enough, he will try it. And once he tries it and he starts doing it, he's going, oh, look at me, I'm doing this. Like, there's also this development inside of the child. And again, this is not intellectual, this is all emotional, isn't it? It's all like, wow, this is great, you know. And you can even see the light in their eyes about it. And if you're the parent looking at it, you can see, oh, look at him, he's thinking this is a pretty great shot, right? Now, the child is not even aware at this stage or assessing its own feelings about it. It's just having them, right? And so he falls over. Mum and Dad let him cry. Don't rush to his aid and nurse him until he's had a good, proper, solid cry about it. Then you might pick him up and nurse him and have a go again. It's all good. You'll be fine, you know. And he tries again, right? And then each time he tries, his confidence grows, his development, his muscular development, he's learning. He's learning all of these things in the process. And each time he falls over, if he's allowed to fully experience the problem, the hurt, then he won't even remember that hurt. Now, can any of you to this day remember the hurt you had when you fell over when you were learning to walk?
No.
No, and that's because most parents will allow you to have the emotion. And also, usually from most parents, there's not a feeling of hatred or revenge or violence coming from them when you're learning to walk. There's in fact quite the opposite feeling coming from them, of love and encouragement and excitement, and even the most harsh of parents on this planet will have, for the most part, emotions of love and excitement and for the child while it's learning to walk. And this is why none of you feel very traumatised about your getting up and walking experience, even though each of you, I'm pretty sure, had an accident or two. Right? And if you think about it, you ask your mum and dad about it, I'm sure they'll say you had quite a few accidents, you know, and quite a few times when they were really, really worried. And some of you might even had to been taken to hospital with your accidents. You know, if you walked down the stairs or something like that and you were tiny and you tumbled down the stairs, they might have rushed you to hospital, and you still can't remember any of it because they let you have the emotional experience, so the emotional experience was not stored. Make sense?
So to the last example we were talking about, so the child gets smacked.
Yeah.
And then they live their life, they move on, they become an adult, and all decisions, a lot of decisions are stemming from that.
Yep.
They're good, bad, and ugly.
Yep.
Different sins.
Yep.
They may have forgotten about that experience completely in their conscious mind.
Well, this is the thing, you see. Yes, in this mind they might have.
Right.
But in this mind they have not.
So my question is, right, how would each one of us get in touch with that original cause if it's so far past, it's not even in our spirit mind, but it's living in us and we're acting
Well, it's
out
in
of
the
it.
brain of your soul.
Right.
And this is why I wanted to raise this with you this morning.
Okay.
You can see where I'm going really if you think about it, because what I'm saying to you now is I'm saying you've got to start training yourself to get out of this mind of yours and into the feelings and senses and beliefs of your soul. Now, the real question then becomes, well, how do I do that? Right? And this is what we want to talk about just for a little while. Right? But can you see, firstly, it's important to do it because in your mind of your spirit body, you may have completely blanked, completely sort of rubbed out and in fact, the spirit body desires to rub it out if the intention of the soul is to no longer feel pain from emotional pain. If that's the intention of the soul, then the spirit body will not remember. You'll be completely unable to remember. This is why people who have experienced often sexual trauma in their childhood can't remember it until certain physical events happen that trigger certain senses, and then they start remembering. Smells, tastes. It can also be like sex, for example, you know, other things. When they start doing these things, which all involve their senses, it triggers the memories, even though they weren't even aware intellectually that it was even there. Yeah?
So one of the most important, one thing that I've had recently is some experiences of when I was a baby at arms
Yep.
and close to a car accident.
Yep.
And everything in my mind told me I can't possibly be remembering this, but my body knows those feelings.
Well,
100%.
yes, that's right, because your soul controls these bodies still, independently of the mind. Remember, the mind is used for thinking and for decisions. It's not used to control all the the physiological and psychological responses that you have. All of that is controlled by the emotions that exist in your soul. So naturally, when you start opening up, shall we call it the can of worms, once you start opening up the entire thing, you start having memories about things that you've forgotten altogether. And you didn't even realise you had experienced even sometimes. Yeah.
And will that include the emotions that are, so we've received emotions from our parents
Yeah.
too, that we have no idea about what happened?
That's right. So remember, the soul has stored the memories. So you could say all of these things, beliefs, senses and emotions, are memories. That's what constitutes the memories that exist in your soul. And the soul has stored these memories, but they're all not stored just as thoughts. They're stored as pictures and smells and tastes and touches and feelings, and they're stored as a complete experience. They're not just stored and they're stored at the age they were stored, not at your age now. You know, you might be, say, 50 or 60 starting to look at some of these things, but they're actually stored, like if an event happened when you were 2, they were all stored at that age of 2 as well.
And also what was almost like force-fed to us while we're still in the womb.
Yes, but usually there is little, aside from the beliefs and emotions of the parents, there is usually little physical violence perpetrated toward the child while it's in the womb. It's when it gets out of the womb that it starts having those kind of experiences generally.
I think Alicia's referring to, say, if her mother had violence towards her in her life, and then she's carrying Alicia,
Yeah.
and the feelings of the mum's fear of violence enter her, even though there's no violence.
Of course, because I said, remember, the emotions and the beliefs of the parents will start entering you. The child has no filters. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
The soul record, can it be seen by the spirit, body, mind when you start to work in tandem together? And is that, quote unquote, the Akashic records that everyone talks about?
Well, it is the Akashic record that everyone talks about, but that's not the same thing. There are 2 records that are stored. One is the record of all your sin, which is presented by your soul to your mind, and it's unavoidable. Once you get into a certain state, it's unavoidable. So that's what a lot of people call the Akashic record. It's a record of all your sin that is now getting presented to you over and over again. And in fact, many of the spirits eventually get so sensitive to it, you see it as a list of sins. And they're not, when I say a list, it's a picture-based list.
Plural,
Yeah, it's sensory. So it's not only pictures, it smells, tastes, everything. It's an experience-based list. So that's what you would call the Akashic record. When it talks about the record of all your memories, that is far more complicated, because that is actually stored in your soul, and the only people that can see it are celestial spirits or greater generally, who can see those things. Does that make sense? That's part of the development that happens when you receive God's love. You can start actually seeing the record of everything that happened to the person in their soul, not just their sins.
So the experience I had was it felt behind me large,
Yeah.
like spirit, body, mind was shown. I had my physical sight like I'm looking at you.
Yeah,
And then I had a second sight that was on top of it.
yeah,
So when I was brushing my teeth, so I was like, this is really cool.
Yeah.
Finish what I'm doing, close my eyes so I could see it.
yeah,
Open my eyes so I could see both, like a double negative.
yeah.
So then when I was done and I laid down in my bed,
Now that's the spirit doing that for you.
okay, because I was able to see current time
Yeah.
all the way back.
Yeah, that's the spirit doing that for you.
Okay.
Who's trying to help you.
Helping me.
Yeah, obviously you're not in the state yet where you can do that for yourself, so he's trying to help you, to give you that information to help show you what it's like.
Okay.
to prepare you.
And then, so if you had a memory all of a sudden came up through your body,
Yeah.
when I was 6 and my mother was beating me because I couldn't memorize the Hail Mary prayer.
Yeah, yeah,
As soon as I got to the word vow, just something happened.
yeah,
So then when I try to work on that problem,
yeah.
I pray to go to the pictorial, emotional, all of it in that one snapshot.
Well, what's happening? Yeah. See, again, you're using your mind a lot here, and
Okay.
and this is the problem you're going to face, right? You are using your mind a lot, and what you're trying to do is determine a method.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're trying to come up. What's the best method?
Relieve me of that
Yeah,
problem.
yeah. Let me work out the method, and I'll work out a method, and I'll follow that method for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, not going to work, right?
No, it's obnoxious and it's.
But the reason why you're doing that is because, firstly, you're getting presented with some information, like your mother beating you when you were 6, and it was a religious experience. The reason why the Spirit presented that with you, because He's saying this event has injured your relationship with God,
Yeah.
and you're not feeling about it properly yet. But what you've done is you've gone with that, and you've gotten all intellectual about that,
Yeah.
and you're not seeing His intent. His intent was to show you attributed her behaviour to God, and her beliefs about God. You attributed her behaviour to God, and this is actually blocking you. So you then said, "Oh, if I pray," but I'm saying, well, in that state, if you truly feel the emotion, you're not going to want to pray because you already blame God for the event.
Yeah.
So you're now manufacturing a prayer in your mind is not going to do you any good, because the feeling in you from that event is, God's a bastard, right? And look at what He did to my mum, and look at what He let my mum do. That's the feeling, right? And that's the feeling that you don't want to connect to. So now what you want to do is create some kind of procedure. That's all very metaphysical.
Yeah.
To sort of help you cope with the memory.
It's just another avoidance.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And so the net result is going to be you don't actually process anything about God, which was the intent
Of being shown.
of being shown. The Spirit, its intent of showing you the memory was so that you would. But now you're not, because you're using your mind now to try to cope with the memory.
Right. But I can go back into that with a feeling state.
You could.
Intending the feeling state
You could.
to see where.
And being really honest about how
Yeah.
you felt in that moment.
Horrible. It's
Yeah.
horrible.
Well, it's not just horrible, there's a lot of effects from it as well.
Yeah.
It's not just in the state either. There's the effects of how that caused you to view God,
Mm-hmm.
and how it caused you to view authority, and how it
Yeah.
caused you to view... So now you're very anti-authority, you know, and in a lot of ways anti-God because of that, without realising it.
Without realizing it.
Yeah, and this is what I'm saying. There's senses, beliefs, and emotions are in the soul, but you're not connecting them because you're reframing them in your mind so that you don't have to bear the full, you could say the full sadness, which is not really sadness, it's grief and
It was
desolation,
a despairing moment.
despair,
Yeah.
the full despair of that childhood experience and what effect it had on your beliefs about God.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. So I can go under it. In other words, when I create these
No, not under it, through it.
through it. Well, what I meant these
It's a
metaphysical
stored
thought process that's another level of avoidance.
Just hang on a second, stop talking for a minute. It's a stored experience that you're going to have to experience at 6 years of age.
Yeah.
Not how old are you now, Debbie?
I'll be 65. So.
Right, so you're not going to be a 65-year-old woman understanding it. You're going to be a 6-year-old woman, a girl, not understanding it at all, but having it.
Got it.
Do you see the difference?
Yeah.
You've got to allow the 6-year-old girl to have the experience.
And feel it.
And feel it as a 6-year-old girl would feel it, as she wanted to feel it at the time.
Exactly.
And wasn't allowed to, right? As she felt it at the time, you're going to have to experience it as she felt it, not as 65-year-old Debbie who's going, I can handle this, I got this down, I know what to do, you know, none of that.
None of that.
None of that.
That's out.
And and this is something you're very habitually doing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because it gets you away from that sort of gut-wrenching 6-year-old experience.
Yeah.
You follow me?
Yes.
But until you have the 6-year-old experience, the 6-year-old experience is locked up in your soul, dictating what you do now and how you view things now, and particularly in that regard, how you view God and how you view authority, which is very rebelliously at the moment, is all dictated by that experience. Right? And that won't change until the 6-year-old, Debbie, can have the experience. That make sense?
Oh yeah, the tears are right there.
Exactly. Yeah. Can you see how you dealt with it, didn't get to the bottom of it?
No, it's
you
like a
got-
survival technique.
Correct.
Because I couldn't, at the moment that my head was being slammed against the hamper,
Yeah.
I was like, I couldn't believe she was doing this to me.
Correct.
And even the word thou, when I picked up the Robert James Lee's books.
But see
I
where
went
you're
there.
going with it now. This is
Yeah.
now 65-year-old Debbie again going,
Yeah.
oh, let's look at the word thou, and why did that trigger my mum? And she doesn't understand any of that, the 6-year-old girl. She just felt really bad, and she's not concerned about the word thou or any other word. She just
Yeah.
needs to have the experience.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
thank you.
This is now 65-year-old Debbie going, how can I help her? How can I, help her avoid the experience? Really, is what's going on. You follow?
Yes.
Yeah. And this is what we notice. Many of you who believe you understand how to deal with your emotions have no idea yet how to deal with them, because what you're doing is you're using this intellectual adult mind
Mm-hmm.
to try to remember things or remembering things, and you're using all these metaphysical techniques of avoidance of the actual experience. But and also there's a lot of judgment of that experience, a lot of judgment of the 6-year-old, a lot of worry about the 6-year-old, concern about the 6-year-old, psychological concern about the 6-year-old, going on by the 65-year-old.
Yeah.
It's like you're now two people.
It's like a split.
Yeah, it's like a split, and it is actually psychologically a split that has occurred inside of you, which has separated the 6-year-old experience from the adult, rather than absorbing the 6-year-old experience as the adult.
So basically, anytime I am blessed with a picture shown to me,
Mhm.
and the sensations and emotions all come up. If that's age 5, you're 5. If it's age 10, you're 10. In other words, allow a process to.
Yeah, don't analyse.
Don't
You'll
analyze.
know when you're doing it. You'll know afterwards. I wasn't even conscious of what age I was necessarily, but now that I realise that I felt 5, and you'll act 5 or 6.
Yeah.
You will be 5 or 6 for a short period of time, however long it takes you to actually release the emotion.
Thank you for the clarification.
That makes sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So the problem with what you've been doing is it's just another way of coping with storing the emotion.
Avoiding it.
Yeah. And so you think you're doing something which makes you, because when we think we're doing things, we think I'm working through it. Yeah, so we sort of develop this sort of feeling of, I can be happy that I'm working through it. I now know I'm getting somewhere, when we're not yet.
So 65-year-old Debbie, or 24-year-old Tom, or 83-year-old Dennis can only clear that when they allow themselves to surrender unto the
Experience.
earlier version of themselves that went
Well,
through this
it's the experience, whatever the experience
Whatever
was.
the experience was.
Yeah. So some of these experiences will be in your childhood, some of them will be when you were 20, some of them will be when you're 18 to 16, some of them will be when you're 30, some of them will be when you're 50, but most people have learnt to store experiences rather than feel them. And in the process of storing them, they'll be stored at the age you had them. But we usually do that less as adults than we do as children, so a lot of them will be very childlike in their experience.
Okay. Thank you very much.
But
Let
a
me
lot-
blow my nose.
Yeah.
when I do that.
Yeah.
It's gonna be blocked.
Just a lot of the work of releasing our sin, though, is like when you get to that experience of the stored emotion, that you've done most of the work. Most of the time, most of us have all of these techniques, such as the one you're even talking about, to try to manage the experience. And that's sin. All of those things that we do to try to manage what's already stored in us is the majority of our sin, actually. It's all of our control techniques, all of our, retreating, our passive aggression, our, I'll just distract myself. I'll follow a new path, or I'll meditate my way out of it, or I'll write it in my journal many times, or all these things are actually ways we have to manage our emotions.
Yeah.
And that's all sin, all of those methods. And
The reason why they sin is because they don't get to the
They don't get to the
experience.
cause.
yes.
Because I still have the memory, and the emotional imprint signature is not completely gone. And was wonderful to hear back from you that it is blocking my relationship to God, because this was done under the guise of a religious
Faith.
thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
So I raise that because really your example there, Debbie, is like you can even know what happened to you as a kid, but it doesn't mean you're releasing it, does it?
Right.
And you're doing a lot of things to prevent the release. So working on all the ways you are resisting your feelings is actually a big part of having your feelings in the end.
Yeah. So what Mary's really saying is having your feelings, once you get to them, is relatively easy. It's all the things you do to avoid having your feelings that you're going to have to deconstruct first.
Yes.
And that's a large part of why you sin as well. A large part of why we sin is because we've got all these methods, techniques of avoidance of prior experiences. Now, bear in mind, the majority of prior experiences are not childhood bad experiences like yours, Debbie. They are mostly prior experiences associated where you chose to sin in a situation, and that is also stored using similar method, right? So, and this is where most people they go, if I just get rid of all this childhood stuff, then I won't sin anymore. Not true. Not true. You have to get rid of all the beliefs and emotions associated with all the decisions and choices you made since then that caused you to sin since then. That's the work you need to do. And that's a lot about repentance. That's not a lot about going through a childhood experience and forgiving mum and dad for that. That's about all the things you chose to do since then, right? Which is causing a lot of damage to your soul. That causes more damage to your soul than any way that somebody else has damaged you. Any way that somebody else has damaged you.
That's the bulk of your pain and suffering is actually coming from what we've done to others.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, and what we do to others in our false beliefs and in the sinful beliefs and the sinful emotions that drive our behaviour, that are the things that cause us to have all sorts of problems thereafter. And they are the things that are determining how much we can love another, right? So when we get fixated on our personal childhood experience, frequently we're becoming very selfish. And we're not seeing that actually, while that experience might be true, and while it does need to be dealt with, I'm saying that it needs to be dealt with, at the end of the day, the main reason for your pain and suffering is not that. It's all the false beliefs and emotions you've imbibed and believed since then, suppressing that.
all the justifications you have for suppressing it, all the ways you think you can manipulate situations and relationships
And control others.
Control your environment, control your kids, control your partner, reject your partner, get into codependence with your partner,
addictions,
getting angry at people, getting manipulative of people, getting avoidant of people.
In other words, all of the unlovingness you've chosen in order to get away from having to deal with any pain that might be within yourself. Does that make sense? What saddens me a lot about the earth experience for most people is they have a little bit of pain from their childhood. Now, I'm not saying all of you have a little bit, because some of you do have quite a lot, right? But usually, compared to the sin they create, it's a little bit. There's a little bit of pain that comes from our childhood that we don't ever want to touch, don't ever want to experience, don't ever want to see. And then, as a result, we formulate a whole series of beliefs and emotions that we then act upon every day thereafter, sinning constantly. And we don't realise that the mountain of sin we've created sometimes just has a seed of maybe 3 months of hard emotion.
Mm-hmm.
But we've chosen to not feel that 3 months of hard emotion, and instead we're prepared to create a mountain of sin instead. And it's sad if you think about it, because that mountain of sin now has caused harm to lots of other people. Almost every person we've ever interacted with in all of our lives has now borne the consequence of that decision to avoid. Right? So it's quite sad, because you end up with this sort of mountain of sin that comes from frequently just a few core experiences that haven't been felt properly as a child, and then decisions that we've made, bad decisions that we've made to avoid it. Right? Now, I agree that as children you didn't have much choice. But I can't agree that as adults that still is the case. Isn't it true that most of you have left home now? Some time ago. Right? You've created your own life. Right? You've gotten away from the bad situations of your childhood. Right? And sometimes some of you even think that what was bad in your childhood, from God's perspective, was actually good. And then others of you think that what was good in your childhood, from God's perspective, it was actually bad. So nowadays a lot of children are growing up with complete freedom to do whatever they want, and those children think that's wonderful. It's bad from God's perspective. So a lot of what we conceive to be the sins of others isn't really even the sins of others. Yeah? And it's not until we start to go through these experiences with God, trying to work out what is our sin, what are their beliefs, and what are the emotions that actually exist, that we even work that out. But there are times when you will have an experience, and whatever that experience was locked up in terms of time period, will be the age that you had it. But when it comes to your sin, you chose to do all of those things. Right? If you grew up in an abusive childhood and then you became an adult, you chose to be permissive with your children. Probably, right? Now, that's you choosing your own sin. Completely different to what your parents did. You're choosing your own sin. Of course, it's motivated by the desire to avoid some of your own childhood, right? And not want to deal with it, and not see the dangers of acting almost in completely the opposite way. Right? Not seeing all of that is caused because you didn't deal with that. So you're not seeing the dangers of acting completely the opposite direction. But it's still yours. And like I said, sometimes your sins are far worse than the things that you're focusing that other people did to you. Right? And this is our problem. Now, when it comes to feeling the sin, well, all of it pretty much has been done as an adult. So you're going to have to go through that emotional experience that's stored. You're going to have to find the experience, the memory of the experience. I did that then. You're going to then, so let's say I was permissive with my children all the way through their childhood. And then you're going to go, well, that was the effect of my sin. What feelings and emotions and beliefs inside of me caused me to take such actions? Mm-hmm. And most of the time, while you did it, you thought it was great. Mm-hmm. You thought you were being a wonderful mother or a wonderful father doing this, right? And that whole attitude means you're completely not aware that it's even a sin at that point, because you think it's good, mm-hmm. but you did. You think it was the love motivating you, but it wasn't, right? And you can see part of this awareness process is going to have to be, wow, I avoided something from my own childhood by doing something to my children that ended up being worse than what happened to me in my own childhood. Mm-hmm. And then the question becomes, well, why did I do that? What was the reason inside of me? Now, some of those reasons will be emotional, based on the 6-year-old Debbie and what happened to her, or the 6-year-old Mandy, what happened to her, But some of them were adult Debbie or Mandy making some decisions because she didn't want to feel about all of those childhood things, and she wanted some different results. Yeah?
One of the interesting things that happened when I was 24 when I had my firstborn. Mm-hmm. I was 26, he was 2. I don't remember. Something was said, something happened, and I slapped him across the face. And the instant I did it, I broke down, I started to cry. He was doing this to me to come down to him. I got eye to eye, and I'm tearing. And he says, "It's not nice to hit little children." Mm-hmm. And I held him and I said, "I'm so sorry. Yeah. I was hit as a child. I promise I will never do it again." And it allowed me to get to a beginning scratch of it, but
still not dealt with.
Still not dealt with, and I understand.
Because you didn't allow yourself to fully grieve and fully connect to the cause. Yeah? Yeah. So now the problem with that, Debbie, is like I keep saying to you, is you now think you've dealt with it, but you haven't.
I have.
So you got to be so careful of this intellectual gymnastics that you're doing with yourself. Yeah. This is you in the mind going, "Oh, that was good. That I dealt with that, and I didn't do it ever again. So that means I dealt with it."
No. Yeah, I know it's still in me because the memory still has
power.
It has packing points that.
Yeah,
I literally read the word "thou" and I go right to it. So.
Yeah.
That's my homework. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so we're all right so far. Is there any, can you see the principle that what I'm trying to teach you, which is these beliefs and emotions and even the senses of your history are your memories. These are all your memories. And your memories are stored in your soul. And what God wants to do is help you remove the bad ones. Do you understand?
Yeah.
When you remove the bad ones, you'll forget. And when I say you forget, what that means is that you'll no longer have an emotional signature about those memories. So it's like emotionally it never happened. You'll remember the event happened, but emotionally you won't have any more feelings about it happening. God wants to remove these memories for you. They are the causes of many of your sins. But you can only do that by allowing the emotion that is connected to the memories. Right? And so it's very, very important. And actually, how of you have read the Paget messages? We said this in the Paget messages. How many of you got that? Can you see? Yeah? It's very rare for a person to understand what memories are. The memories are all of these beliefs and emotions and sensory feelings that were all stored in your soul. And God wants to help remove them from you so that you no longer experience unhappiness because of them, and also so that you no longer sin. But when you're in a shut down state, controlling all of your memories, and you're controlling all your emotions, and you're trying to suppress them and keep them under wraps and keep them down and keep yourself unaware, you're sinning against the very process that God wants to help you through so that you can be relieved of them. That make sense?
Is this where you say when you're in repentance, God can help you remove
Correct.
the causes? This is
The
what
causes
we're
are the memories.
Right, but he could, if I just want to make sure I've heard you correctly in the past, that when we're in a state of repentance,
Yeah.
a true state, a sincere state of repentance,
Yep.
that God can help us, that part of having God's love enter our soul, if I'm
Yes.
remembering
Correct.
correctly,
The,
is that
the
that
love gets
love
rid of the memories.
will help get rid of these memories that are in our soul that we're now discussing.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yep.
Is this also how we'll get our memories back of what we've been doing in the sleep state?
Get your memories back of everything.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Emma asked,
Is that also how we get our memories back of what we've been doing in the sleep state and our spirit life?
yeah, so you think about it, your entire life is 24 hours, not just 18 or 16 or whatever it is. It's 24, and your soul is storing the memories of all those experiences. So naturally, the more you deal with these things, the more possibility there is of getting back the memories of your entire life. Of course, when you get rid of you discard your physical body, there'll be points of contact with your memories that occur when you visit places in the spirit world that will trigger them if they haven't happened before then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you can have all of them before then.
Great. Thank
Not
you.
that you want all of them before then.
Well,
Because a lot of times we do a lot of
disturbing things.
disturbing things in our sleep state that we wouldn't even consider doing in our awake state.
Yeah.
Right? So most of us don't want to know what we were doing to a large degree. Yeah?
But if we become sensitive to our feelings, we might feel things that we don't necessarily associate with something that's happened in our life as we remember it.
Correct?
And then we might sort of become more open to remembering some things if we felt the emotions.
Correct.
of them.
You've engaged sin in your sleep state.
Yeah.
So there'll be times when you'll become aware of that. Yep. Okay,
So
Alicia?
when we have emotion come up that feels like it's not ours, so that
Mhm.
could be spirits because they're hooking into something.
Mhm.
Yes. But it's not a memory of look, for example, I remember, well, I had this emotion about being terrified of bombs, for
Yeah.
example,
Yeah.
which I know my mum experienced.
Yeah.
So that's not that she's passed on the memory, it's that she has a belief about, or that she has this sensory experience.
Your
that
mum's
she's
passed,
then
right?
Yes, that she's then passed, because
Yeah,
she's
what she's doing, she's just saying, she knows you've got fear. She's got to the point now where she realises a lot of your fear comes from her.
Yeah.
She's giving you images. One of those images is
The
bombs
yeah,
falling, and her being totally terrified.
Okay, yeah, thank you, because I haven't thought about that. I've had that since she's passed.
That's right.
So, thank you.
That's right. So she's giving you that memory, right, of hers to show you that actually you have the fear of the bombs falling without even the memory.
Yeah.
The memory being what was passed to you through emotions and beliefs from your mother.
Yeah.
And
Right.
a lot, like your mum's got a lot of regret now because she can see she suppressed that fear her whole life, and it just affected her interactions with you a lot, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense? And so through her process of repentance, she's going, I need to help my daughter see that some of her fears, she needs to feel these fears,
Yeah.
but they belong to my life.
Yeah, so that gives an example for me of course you can't work it out.
Yeah.
You just have the fear of it, yeah.
If your parent was sexually
Can we hands, please? Katerina, thanks.
Could the abusive parent abuse you in your sleep state as well
Yep.
when you're a child?
Yep. So yes.
I have that experience with my dad.
Yeah.
Like as a teenager, I woke up horrified because he was having sex with me.
Yeah.
And I don't recall any memory of that.
Yeah.
But after listening to you, it affected me.
Yeah.
That, whoa,
Yeah.
that happened. That was
Yeah, and
actual
sometimes,
experience.
and sometimes it can be an actual experience. Sometimes it can also be you signalling to yourself there is a sexual
Element in my
element
relationship
in my
with my father.
relationship with Dad in the awake state.
Yeah, so don't interpret it immediately as a
it's
sleep state
definitely
experience.
Okay.
It may not be a sleep state experience, but you coming to recognise in your sleep state that your father sexualised his relationship with you, right?
And
And then you need to deal with that.
And as a teenager, it's kind of hijacking your sexual feelings,
Yeah.
which is why you're dreaming, I'm in bed with dad. Because I'm having sexual feelings, but it feels like this is happening with dad.
Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily mean that that is your sleep state experience. It could be your soul telling your mind to remember something when you wake up so that you know you've got to deal with this yet. And you do need to deal with that. Yeah, your father has had this, and a lot of men do have that towards their daughters, to be honest, and just like a lot of mothers have it towards their sons. And these things need to be dealt with. And so there's a lot of what you would call sexual abuse that occurs, which is actually more emotionally incestuous in the sense that it happened as an emotional experience rather than a physical one.
Yeah, because I have then the horror came of, holy crap, I've done that to my 2 sons.
Yeah, frequently that's what happens. We end up, when we, in a partnership and we're not happy with our relationship, sexually or emotionally happy in our relationship, frequently what we do is we groom our children to be the ideal gender of the partner that we're in the relationship with, and we groom our children to take to satisfy us in the ways that our partner isn't. So let's say my partner's not very emotionally expressive. Doesn't hug me much or anything like that. I've talked about it with her. She doesn't want to change that. We have arguments about it. It never works out. But I have a daughter, and so I hug her all the time. Right? I'm really just using my daughter to replace all the things, the shortcomings in my relationship with my partner. Right? Now, my daughter, when she grows up, she's going to feel some of that eventually. Initially, she might feel, Daddy loved me more than Mummy, and all that kind of stuff. But when she becomes an adult, she'll see how emotionally incestuous that was. Because I was using her, right, to avoid this relationship. Yeah, selfishly using her to avoid the relationship. And not only that, I've damaged her connection to her soulmate, potentially, by having this really close bond with my daughter, which I don't actually have with my partner. Right? So these kind of things happen very commonly, and oftentimes you dream about it to remind you that you've got to deal with these things. Make sense? Patty?
So, going back to Alicia's experience with her mother and the bombs, I have an experience of just lying in bed and feeling like trembling.
Yep.
And I don't feel afraid, but my body is telling me there must be fear. I mean, but there's nothing else, nothing I can anchor it on.
And if your body is trembling but you're not emotionally trembling with it,
right,
then it means you're quite disconnected from your soul's feelings.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So you're not actually yet releasing the fear.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is quite common as well, because we've used our minds to sort of suppress our emotional experience and not allow ourselves to have the full experience emotionally. Many of us are more connected to our body than we are to our soul, right? So we allow our body to do things that we won't allow our soul to do. So your soul needs to tremble. And when that does, emotionally you'll be trembling. And then you'll also feel it physically, and that is now the experience. And you need to let yourself go through that experience. Does that make sense?
And instead I do what Debbie does,
Correct.
and I'm busy trying to figure it out.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in the mind, like this is, again, the mind's just responding to the soul's demands to avoid the whole experience. So if you have a soul demand in your feelings, I want to get out of this terrible experience, then your mind's going to help you. And if that means disconnecting emotionally from what's happening to your body, that's what your mind will encourage you to do. You follow?
I think so. I'm still trying to figure out how to
To reconnect?
shift it, yes.
Yeah, reconnect. Well, this is about educating yourself a lot, isn't it, more emotionally? You see, on Earth, the big problem on Earth is that none of us have been educated about emotions. We haven't. We've been, for years and years and years, we've been educated with our mind, and nobody thought to develop or help us develop any emotional intelligence, did they? Nobody thought really to help us understand ourselves well, or understand why we feel what we feel, or understand the relationship between sin and our feelings, and all those kind of things. Nobody's ever taught us to do any of those things, right? So we're going to have to teach ourselves to do those things. And quite often that is the difficult task of opening up to your sin. You having to teach yourself how things feel. So the reason why, so this was a much longer discussion than I was originally intending. The reason why I've raised this is because I want to encourage you towards some homework for the next year. Is that all right? Okay. So the homework is this. What do certain sins feel like? What can I describe my feelings? What words would I use to describe my feelings? So if you, like, just every day, if you try to do this for, if it was me, I'd be doing it for hours every day, and this is what I've had to do. But I'd encourage you at least to do it for 10 or 15 minutes a day, to sit down, at some point during the day when you've got some peace, and just sit with yourself and go, what do I feel right now? What words would describe my feelings right now? Now, if you don't know the words, then I suggest there's I think I've done put a download on our website somewhere. Somebody did tell me where it was.
I'm going to put it on the blog.
Mary will put it on
up.
But there was a website that I found called Nonviolent Communication.
I think some
Which
people
I've
are
mentioned
probably
before.
going to work on doing a list just
And
for
they're going to put together a list of different emotions. I don't encourage you to go down all the other roads of nonviolent communication because it'll greatly distance yourself from your own feelings. But what I would like to do is there's a whole heap of emotions that are sort of classified as emotions when you feel satisfied. And then there's a whole heap of emotions that you could classify as emotions when you feel dissatisfied. Right? And there's a whole lot of words associated with those emotions. Right? And what I'd encourage you to do is to start figuring out how you feel. So the first process, the first part of the homework is this. Number one is to just sit down for 15 minutes a day to get some words together that describe your feelings about how you feel right then when you sit down. Right? A lot of you will start describing physical sensations rather than feelings, and you have to get out of that. It has to be feelings. So some of you sit down and go, I'm a back sore. How do you feel about it? What is your feeling? Not that your back's sore. Obviously there's pain in your back, but what do you feel? Right? So back sore, lower back, probably is going to be you're feeling like probably issues of worth that you're not aware of, for example. But don't guess. Yeah. I'm suggesting you just sit there, and when you start, you're going to sit there for 15 minutes, and you're going to think, what a waste of time. Because it's sort of like after 15 minutes you go, that I didn't work out what I felt at all really. So when I started doing this myself, because I have done this, I was 33 years old, and I couldn't tell you, I could sit down for an hour and I still couldn't tell you what I was feeling. So don't be afraid that after the 15, 20 minutes or whatever, you're sitting there and you still don't know what you're feeling. Cool. Right? The key is to give yourself that time every day to actually start to connect to your soul, because your soul's brain is your feelings and emotions and your senses and the emotions associated with your beliefs. And if you can't feel those things, then your soul's like a dead soul. right? You could say it's dormant, it's all shriveled up, it doesn't know how to work. And what we need to do is get the soul working. Do you follow? So the point of these exercises is to firstly get the soul working, and then once the soul starts working, now I can start working out, well, what do when I feel like angry, what am I feeling? When I'm feeling like sad, what am I feeling? When I feel despair, what am I feeling? And what's my beliefs about my despair? And what's my beliefs about my anger? And you'll start to see that your beliefs about your anger is about power, that you like the power of it, You like how it gets you out of having to deal with things, and it pushes people away that you don't want to have to deal with, and it lets you blame others when you actually feel some blame of yourself, or when you actually feel bad about yourself and things like that. And you'll start recognising the feelings. But if you don't do it, you will remain completely uneducated about feelings the entire life on earth. And then at some point you're going to have to do exactly what I'm suggesting in the spirit world. You'll have to learn how to connect to your feelings. So I'm suggesting that all of you learn how to connect to your feelings now. Right? Don't put it off. And those of you who are in your 50s, 60s, 70s or whatever, who's here older than 70? I think a few of you, yeah? 4. Who's older than 60? Yep, so now we have a few more. 50s? Yeah? 40s? 30s? Okay, 20s? Okay. Now, those of you who are in your 20s, you might think that this is going to be easier for you than for others. But that's not necessarily true, actually, because a lot of children have been brought up from a young age to not have their feelings. Right? So, I'd encourage you to go, my goal for the next year is to be able to become more sensitive to feelings. Firstly, my own. Now, down the track, I hope that you'll become more sensitive to others, because you can't really love others without becoming sensitive to their feelings, can you? But if you're completely desensitized to your own feelings, it's going to be pretty hard for you to work out what somebody else is feeling. During the night this morning, Mary and I got up at the same time to go to the toilet, and last night, because we needed to sleep, we slept in separate beds, right? And so we got up, it was dark, I couldn't see Mary, but I knew exactly what she felt. Right? That's how it needs to be in your future. You need to be able to feel exactly what the person feels. To do that, you're going to have to feel exactly what you feel first. So you're going to have to be able to determine the difference between your feelings and someone else's feelings. Can you see this is going to help you with spirits as well? Because you'll be able to determine your feelings and their feelings as separate things. And also, it's going to help you with spirits, because a lot of spirits who are coming to you are masquerading with you. They're making out with you that they are nice spirits when they're not, or they're making out with you that you're helping them when actually they're just mucking around with you. Right? They're making out things with you, and because you can't feel them, you don't know. But if you're more sensitive to your own feelings, you will be able to feel yourself, and then you'll be able to feel, he's just making fun of me. He's just having a laugh at my expense. Does that make sense? He's just distracting me from getting onto my stuff. Why? Why am I allowing that? You'll be able to work all that out. Because it's only when your brain of your soul starts working that you really start growing. Right? Now, in the Paget messages, some of the spirits came along and said, it's like I've got a dead soul. It's all shriveled and dead, and I don't know, I've lost my soul, some people have said. Remember, there was a few messages in the Paget messages. This is why. because they were so detuned from the real part, the beliefs, the senses, the emotions, they're all emotional in nature. They were so detuned from the brain and the soul, the way the soul works, that it's like their soul didn't work anymore. Right? And many of them then believe they haven't got one. And there's some people in the spirit world when they arrive, and after hearing about the soul and developing the soul, they go, but I haven't got one because I don't feel that way. I don't have feelings. Yeah? I don't have these things. And they have to be educated. No, everyone has one. Everyone's got a soul. We've just become so desensitized from it, so detuned, shut down, resistive to even understanding what's in it anymore. Okay? Now, the reason why I'm raising all of this too is that every sin is a feeling, and your fight for your sin are feelings. So if you can't feel feelings, you're not going to recognise the difference between fighting for your sin versus recognising your sin versus actually feeling your sin. Right? You're going to believe that when you take a certain course of action that you're doing it well motivated, when actually, because you can't feel your sin, you can't feel that that sin is motivating you. Does that make sense? And it took me many, many years to work through this for myself in this life. You know, all the 14 have imbibed sin during the course of their life, just like you have in this life. And it took me many years to work out, what do I even feel about things? Right? And I had to put forward a dedicated effort of my own, using my own desire to do so. And everyone around me was trying to stop me from doing it at the same time. But I had to put forward a dedicated effort to discover what my feelings actually were. And for many of you, you're going to have to do the same thing. Put forward a dedicated effort to find out what your feelings are. Every sin has a feeling, and every avoidance of sin has a feeling. And to deal with sin, you're going to have to firstly deal with your avoidance of it and the techniques you use to avoid it. And to know that, you're going to have to know how that feels when you're avoiding it. That's why, remember on Friday night, I asked you the question for your homework was, how do you feel when you're in a state of resistance? How does this resistance to your sin feel? Right? Because if you don't understand how it feels, you're going to be in your resistance doing it and not knowing you're even doing it. You're going to think, I'm right, I'm righteous. That person, whoever you're upset with, they did the wrong thing. They don't get me. They don't understand me. They don't, you know. You're going to feel all of those things instead of recognizing, oh, here I am again. This is what it feels like to fight my sin. This is what it feels like fighting the truth. Yeah? Because substantially, you could say your sin is the truth of your condition right now. So when you fight your sin, you're fighting the truth of your condition right now. Can you see that? Yeah. And that's not going to be very conducive for your progress. Yeah. And particularly if you want to progress like with your relationship with God. If you fight your sin, God's just going to let you keep fighting it. He's saying, well, you're using your will to fight your own sin. There's nothing I can do to help you in that place while you're using your will to fight. Right? God's just going to, these laws are going to be trying to undo it. Some of you have nice spirit friends around you, might help you a bit. But at the end of the day, there's little they can do while you're in the active process of fighting your own sin. Right?
How does it relate to the feeling you get from your conscience? Is it similar?
Well, the problem with the operation of the conscience is, while I desire my sin, I'm not going to want to listen to God saying that I have one. Sin, I mean. Am I? So I'm going to detune from my conscience while I'm fighting for my sin. But if I can start to feel what the sin feels like, then I can also start to ask God, because I'm open now to feeling what the sin feels like. I can ask God, I feel like this is what it feels like and this is a sin. And God can say yes or no to you about that now, because you're now open to the concept. But when you're fighting your sin, can you see you're not going to want to hear anything from God about your sin. All you want to hear from God is He loves you and everything's great. Right? Now, you'll hear He loves you, but you won't hear that everything's great. And that you can only hear everything's great when everything is great. That's how it is. So the problem we have when we're in a state where we want to continue our sin and we want to resist the knowledge of it is we're also very detuned from our conscience. The conscience will barely bother you about an issue. It'll be like it's not even an issue. Right? So just in the example before that I gave about a parent, letting their child roam free, without any discipline. And I'm not talking about corporal punishment. I'm talking about without any restriction or discipline, and without any law. If you let your child do that, that is a sin. But the parent who's doing it is utterly convinced that it's not one. Utterly. Otherwise, if they were convinced it was one, would they be doing it?
No.
Of course they wouldn't be. So they are utterly convinced that it's not a sin. And so in that moment, you imagine asking God, you're utterly convinced what you're doing is not a sin. So you ask God, is me letting my children, be without law a sin? And you're not going to hear anything from God about the matter because you're completely blocked to hearing that it's wrong. But you might hear a spirit say, no, go for it. Mm-hmm. I agree with that too. I think that's great, You might hear that. And if you're not careful, you might then think that was God, which would be even worse, to attribute such thoughts to God, which is actually a blasphemy. Because God has established law for every child, so He doesn't think it's right to be lawless. So, it would be a blasphemy if we accepted that as coming from God, but we would be tempted to, because we are in a state where we believe that is true. Right? So the conscience, the problem with it, when we're in sin, is we'll want confirmation of our sin. So our conscience is not going to work very well in that state. Yeah. So, but when we sensitise to the feelings of our sin, now we're also sensitising to the operation of the conscience as well. Because now we're looking at the possibility that, this feeling is a sin. So now we're more open to receiving some truths about the matter. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but any person who's got a very fixed opinion is very hard to convince otherwise, aren't they?
Yes.
They're very hard to convince otherwise. Now, what you've got to determine is whether the fixed opinion is God's or it's just your own. Right? And for the most part, when we're in sin, the fixed opinion is our own. And because the way you sin is different to the way I sin, right? My fixed opinion on the exact same issue as your fixed opinion is probably going to be very much in harmony with the sins we commit. Right? But both out of harmony with God. So even asking other people, what do you think? Is this a sin? Has its dangers, doesn't it? Yeah. And this is why we've got to learn how to sensitise emotionally so that we can open up our soul emotionally. Once our soul is opened up emotionally, now emotions coming from God can be felt, which is how the conscience works, is emotions coming from God about how things, what we're doing. They can be felt. I can feel my own feelings, and I can also feel the emotions of my partner, my friends, my family. I can start to understand what's really going on in my life. Not what everything looks pretty on the outside going on, but what's really happening? What's the underlying stream of life that's happening in my lack of awareness that I haven't seen before? But it's all happening. See, most of us don't realise that almost every single interaction you're having with another person has nothing to do with what you're talking to them about. Right? It's got everything to do with the feelings you have and the feelings they have and why the two of you are attracted even to come together to even have a conversation. Right? And most of us have no awareness of that at all because we're so much in this mind-dominant space that we have no idea what's really going on. Why is a person reacting the way they're reacting? Why am I reacting the way I'm reacting? Why do I find it uncomfortable with that person? And why do I find it more attractive to talk to this person? We have no idea about why all that's going on because we lack the sensitivity. Because our sin causes us to numb out of our sensitivity. It's a suppression of our sensitivity. It's a suppression of the soul's brain, or you could also say it's a shriveling of the soul and its capacity to understand. Yeah? What's the time?
Yeah, it's after.
Time to have lunch, I think. Should we wait for after
Can I
lunch?
just ask one quick question?
Can she ask one quick question?
Let me ask a question.
The question is whether it's a quick answer.
Yeah.
Would it be accurate to call this, this teaching of today, especially the emotional relationship with God? Because even a conscience, you just said, is emotional, sensitive.
What would be accurate to say is that a relationship with God is not even possible without emotion. So the whole concept of a relationship is dependent upon emotion. So don't call it an emotional relationship with God. Call it a relationship with God that is only soul-based. It is only based upon emotions. You follow? So you can't have an intellectual relationship with God. You can't have one. You never will be able to have one. Does that make sense? You never will be able to have one. So there's no such thing as an intellectual relationship with God. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, see everyone back here at about 1:45.